Okay, so we are on the very last line of 22b, Chav Beis and Beis. And we're coming now to the second half, continuing the second half of the Mishnah. So we discussed yesterday the Mishnah could be divided into three sections. The first section is really related to the previous discussion on the question of merit and whether a merit plays a variable in suspending the demise of a woman who is guilty. So the first opinion was discussed in the previous Mishnah, and now the latter two opinions in the Mishnah which we studied yesterday, even though the Gemara had discussed these opinions way earlier. And you can refer back to those classes where we discuss what Rabbi Shimon is thinking, what Rabbi is thinking, and so on. That's the first half of the Mishnah. The second half of the Mishnah, which we started already yesterday, is a discussion on the laws of the mincha offering. The mincha offering is the offering that the Sotah offers. Mincha means the offering is made of flour. That's what mincha means. And we explained yesterday, like the axis of how we understand karbanos, the type of substance, whether it's an animal, a kind of animal, whether it's flour, water, wine, not water, wine, oil. And then the other side of the axis is what kind of carbon it is. Is it a sin offering, a guilt offering? Is it a shlomim? Is it a birth offering, and so on? So the rules apply universally, for the most part, to any offerings that find themselves in the same axis, with certain exceptions. For example, one exception with regard to the Sotah, we have already studied that all minchas, all offerings of flour use white flour, fine wheat flour, whereas this one is barley. So you have exceptions, but generally speaking, any offering that's on the same axis has the same laws. So considering that, the Mishnah now discusses the laws relating to the offering of the Sotah, and these laws will apply universally to any other offerings on that same axis, which is the meal offering. Now, the law we discussed yesterday is what happens if the meal offering becomes in contact with impurity. And we explained that it depends on at what point and what point it becomes impure is dependent on or is resultant from what level of consecration or designation does this offering have. Until the point that the flour enters into the vessel that belongs to the temple, until that point, then my obligation to bring a meal offering to the temple is on the value of the offering, not the substance of the offering. And therefore, if the offering became impure before it entered into the vessel that belongs to the temple, I can just exchange it for another flour, sell it, take the value, and buy another one, no problem. However, once the meal offering enters, the flour enters the vessel that belongs to the temple, so now not only is the value belong to the temple, but the very substance belongs to the temple. And therefore, I cannot take it and sell it, cannot redeem it in the language of the Mishnah. And therefore, that meal offering has to be burnt, just as is the case with many offerings. There's a special designated section in the temple to burn all invalidated offerings, and that's where this flour is burnt. And then out of pocket, the owner has to bring another meal offering. This is where we left off. So this rule applies to the Sotah offering, but it also applies universally.
Redemption, it's impure as to body, right?
The
second one.
Well, the consecration is to the very body, the very substance of the flour. The consecration, meaning the very body, the very substance of the offering belongs to the temple, not just the value. And therefore, you cannot exchange it for another.
Must be burned, right?
It must be burnt, and you bring out of pocket another one. Okay. There are variables because it depends on how you designate your offering. Do I take it upon myself, in which case I'm designating the value, or do I point at a certain animal or a certain offering and say this will belong to the temple? In which case, if I say this, then I'm taking upon myself the responsibility that this one get there.
Right.
If I can't exchange it.
Dialogue.
That's right. It's neder and adava. It's a whole discussion. That's right. But the Gemara doesn't get into that at the moment. At the moment, the Gemara assumes, certainly when it comes to the Sotah, that when I bring the meal offering, I'm only designating the value of the flour until such time that it enters into the consecrated vessel, and then the very body, the very substance of the flour becomes consecrated and thus cannot be redeemed. This is where we left off yesterday. So having said that, now the Mishnah introduces a number of other cases in which the offering becomes invalidated and thus must be burnt. Now, there's a certain time frame when this happens. Certainly, it will only be burnt after it's been consecrated in the vessel of the temple. But before such point, there's no reason to burn it, considering that only the value belongs to the temple, and I can exchange it and use it for a different kind of offering, in theory, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I shouldn't say this, because maybe because it's been invalidated for other reasons, you can no longer go through with the process, and you have to burn it also. I don't think so. I think it's only after it's been consecrated, and therefore, let me see if there are actually comments.
What happens to that physical?
Okay, we'll have to see the Gemara. The Gemara is going to talk about it soon. Sorry?
What happens to in a case where if it comes impure prior to consecration?
Yeah.
And you redeem it, what happens to that physical?
Whether it's no longer holy, and someone can eat it just like regular flour. One is allowed to eat impure flour. You just can't go to the temple until you get purified. Right?
You can eat it, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer sanctified.
It's no longer sanctified because the value has been transferred to something else.
But it's impure.
But you're allowed to eat it.
Anyone except the Kohen.
Exactly, unless the Kohen is on service or plans on eating truma or something like that, eat impurity. It seems clear that besides for Kohanim, who are very careful about staying pure because of their job in the temple, most Jews would go about their business, contracting impurity, and when it came time to go to the temple, a week before Pesach, a week before Shavuos, before Sukkot, they would go through the 7-day process of sprinkling the red heifer, mikvah and whatever, and then they would go into the temple. That's what it seems to me. Unless a person had a specific occasion, he wanted to go to the temple, so then he would go through the process of ritual purification. But it would seem to me that most Jews living out in the field, in the suburbs or the farmers, it doesn't seem to me that they were super careful about making sure they were pure.
If a person
right?
eats impure food, they contract ritual impurity.
Depending on the level of it, touch it, don't touch it. It's assuming they touch it, because swallowing itself doesn't confirm.
And does mikvah alone purify that, or you need?
With touching, depending on what level the food is, but you might need sprinkling, depending on what level the food is. And if it's liquid, if it's not liquid, it's very, very, very complicated, the laws of ritual impurity. Probably the most complicated, even more complicated than kabbanis, if you can imagine that. Right. Anyway.
This is where tables and charts come in.
Yeah, so when it comes to kabbanis, you can make a chart, like I explained that axis with a couple of exceptions. When it comes to purity and impurity, you can make a chart, but there's so many variables. And then you have to add it's a big chart, and then you have to make an overlay of rabbinic enactments. And then because it's only rabbinic enactments, sometimes it gets super suspended. There are layers and layers that, like, you would have to have like one spreadsheet and then overlay another spreadsheet, and then remove it when circumstances require. It would be
kind of those
like a stencil. That's right, like a stencil would come down. That's the only way I would see this happening, because you have it's endless.
Okay, let's put this now, the rabbinic transparency.
Yeah, but then there's also what type. Like, meaning you have what type of impurity. How did you contact it? What level distance are you from it? What are you trying to accomplish in your purity? Are you just trying to be with your wife? Are you trying to go to the temple? Are you trying to eat truma? It's so complicated. You know what? At this point, you probably can. Anyway, okay, so we're sidetracked.
Sorry.
No worries, it's fun. But... Okay, so the Mishnah then says, the following are the meal offerings, the very last line, 22b. The following are those whose meal offerings become invalid, even if, not just if it went to not only if it became consecrated, and now the very body of the offering is sanctified and therefore cannot be exchanged if some invalidation were to happen. But furthermore, even if the fistful was taken, remember I explained that yesterday, that the meal offerings on this axis, the meal offering, we'll see exceptions to the rule soon, but meal offerings on this axis, the kohen will take a fistful, and then the rest of the flour will be eaten by either the owners or the kohen. Yeah. So just even just like other offerings, that's right. That's right, because this axis is a chatas. It's a flour offering, but on the axis of chatas, and chatas partially is eaten by the owners. That's right. That's correct. It's on that axis. That's exactly right. So Rashi says, even if the fistful was offered and had not become contract of impurity, yet because of some other invalidation, the meal offering is burnt, meaning whatever's left of it after the fistful has been offered. Right, whatever's left of it that's supposed to be eaten by the owners, or by the kohen, will be thrown out, will be burnt.
Does that mean that the contract the contracted ritual impurity after the holy part.
There's no ritual impurity. It's other invalidations. The ritual impurity, certainly, we've explained that already. But even if there's no ritual impurity, there's other validations, other factors that invalidate the offering, which we'll explain in a moment, the whole list. That when that happens, even if the fistful was offered in the temple, which means the process of the offering has already begun, nonetheless, the leftovers, which ordinarily should be eaten, is burnt.
I just wanted to clarify though.
Yeah.
Is that fistful being burnt as impurity on the altar, or
No, it's being.
It was pure at the time it was placed on the altar?
Yes, right.
And subsequently.
It didn't become impure. Something else happened which invalidated it. Which we're going to list. That's right.
Something else happened in the interim.
That's right.
Between that fistful
and the point at which the remainder is eaten, and because of this invalidation, the remainder is burnt on that section that's meant for invalidated offerings.
Because if it were invalidated for other reasons that before it was placed,
They wouldn't have, if it was invalidated for some other reasons earlier, they wouldn't have even placed that fistful.
That's what I'm asking.
Right? They wouldn't have even placed the fistful. Rashi's saying even if we got so far as the fistful was offered, because of the invalidating factors, it's even. Even if the offering already begun, the process already began because they took a fistful and put it on the altar, and the leftovers should be eaten by the kohen. Right? But nonetheless, because of the invalidations we're about to list, the offering is discarded and it's burnt on the special section for invalidated offerings. Okay. That's right. And certainly if it was invalidated earlier, after consecration, because the process of the offering didn't even begin, certainly you would burn it as an invalidated offering. So let's see, these are the circumstances in which this happens. Now later, in a later chapter, okay, let's first read. Haimeres, top of 23a. Haimeres, if the woman says, Tmeani, she confesses, and she says, Tmeani loch, I am guilty, I'm impure to you, literally, meaning I engaged in intimacy with that guy about which I'm being suspected. So she held her ground, didn't say anything, waited all the way till the end. After the fistful is given, right? And let's go, remember we had this opinion as to when the water is erased. Is it erased before the offering or after the offering? Let's just say it's going after, whatever it is. The different opinions we discussed in a way earlier class. But up until that point, she held out. She didn't want to say anything. And after the fistful is offered on the altar, she says, I confess, I can't do this anymore. I'm guilty. So now there's no reason to go ahead with the offering because it's already been done.
Majority opinion is you put the fistful on before she drinks, right?
That's right. And yes, that's right. That's the majority opinion. Even before the mixing of even before the erasing of God's name.
Okay, so they put it on the barley.
On the fistful, the barley is put on the altar.
The remainder now became invalidated because she confessed.
That's right. So there's no reason to go ahead with the start the proceeding anymore because she's confessed. Yeah. So the Gemara here does not discuss what to do with her. What do we do with her? But the Mishnah elsewhere discusses that. What do we do with her? Because she confessed to her guilt. So obviously she doesn't drink the water. But they go through a divorce and she loses her ketubah. Because she admits to being unfaithful. So she loses the right to her ketubah. This will the Mishnah will discuss elsewhere in a later chapter. That's right. Here we're talking about specifically the meal offering. Okay. Now that's case number one, where she admits to her guilt. Case number two is shabo lo edim. If witnesses arrived, she temeya, that she is impure. So witnesses arrived. Saying that we saw behind closed doors she was intimate with this guy we suspect. So now again, there's no reason to go through with the Sotah proceeding because we know now she's guilty. So again, the meal offering is then burnt along with all other invalid offerings in that special fire in the temple. And as the Mishnah tells us elsewhere, they divorce, she doesn't drink, and she loses the ketubah. Because again, she's been proven to be guilty.
Is there a name for that location where
yeah, the location is called Beis Hadeshin, Beis Hadeshin. No, Beis Hadeshin. I don't remember. There's a name for it. I don't remember. Let's see if it says here.
It's in the southeast corner. Right?
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, there's a name for it. I don't remember, but there's a name for it. Okay. So that was case number two, in which even after the offering has been offered, the fistful been offering, we invalidate the program. The process ends, and we burn the rest of the offering. Case number one is where she admits to guilt. And case number two is where we know she's guilty because of witnesses.
So obviously when it says witnesses, it's two or more.
Yeah, two valid witnesses, yeah. Case number 3, where she says, Eini shoysa, I don't want to drink. She's not confessing to guilt, but she doesn't want to drink. So then again, because she doesn't want to drink, we don't force her to drink. So at this point, there's no reason to go forward with the proceeding. Again, the rest of the offering is burnt in that location.
It's like if you are, I don't know here, but if you don't take the breathalyzer test and the police ask you to on the suspicion of being intoxicated, in the law, it's presumption of guilt.
Is that really?
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Is this a presumption of guilt?
This is the same
So the Mishnah is going to discuss later whether she loses a ketubah or not.
Oh, okay, but she.
Yeah, but certainly there's no the proceeding is ended because she refuses to go ahead with the drinking.
And they have to divorce, right?
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, case number 4, but these two cases have a different law a little bit. Not regarding the offering. Regarding the offering, the law is the same that you have to discard of it. It's to burn it in that special location. But with regard to the ketubah, the law is a bit different. So v'shabayla ein eretz lashkaisa. If the husband decides, I'm done, I don't want to force her to drink. Right?
Mm-hmm.
1 second, and then I looked it up earlier, I'm looking it up again. So I'm quite sure that in this case,
he can do that?
Yeah, he can say, I don't want to drink anymore. So in this case, where is it? It's here. In this case, yeah, she gets her ksuba and she doesn't drink because he stops the proceeding. And again, we're learning now that because the proceeding is ended, so it seems like they have to divorce. That's what it seems like. It seems like they have to divorce. Perhaps we'll get to that when we learn the Mishnah later in chapter 4. Right here, we're learning chapter 2 we're still in.
So he still has enforcement rights even up to this point.
Yeah, chapter 3, I'm sorry.
When I say that, I mean he has the ability to stop the soda.
That's right.
At any point. Well,
See, he does and she does. They both do. But if she does it, she loses her ketubah. If he does it, then she still has the ketubah.
Yeah.
Because it's on him, not on her.
And she can, of course.
That's right.
But with consequences.
Yeah. So that was case number 4.
Yeah.
In which the remainder of the offering was burnt in that special location. Case number 5 is Shabaila Bala Baderech, if her husband was intimate with her on the way to the proceeding. Remember, we discussed at length the whole process by which if she first goes to the.
Have to have a witness.
That's right. She first goes to the Bezdin in her town,
Yeah.
and then they investigate the case. They appoint 2 scholars to accompany them, and if somehow these 2 scholars failed their job and the husband still was intimate with her, and we know that now because I guess those witnesses saw. So then again, there's no reason to go ahead through with the Sotah because he misbehaved as much as she did. And in this case, she definitely gets her ketubah because it's his problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she gets her ketubah.
So all of these, though, the whole point of raising these in the first place, though, was to say that these are other invalidations of the.
That's right. It's other invalidations of the process, and by osmosis, invalidation of the offering, and therefore it is burnt in that special location. Even if the proceeding began and they took even if the proceeding of the offering began, they took a fistful, put it on the altar. Okay. So from this, sorry.
Because these invalidate the proceeding. But it's tied to the offering. So the offering, because before we were discussing how the water was sort of a defining point.
Right, the Gemara discussed that
in the process.
when the Gemara went through that's right.
Heavy weight
to the offering, yeah.
the offering.
So if you're of the view that the drinking only happens later, then obviously you're stopping because there's no reason to drink.
Yeah.
But when the Gemara went through the opinions about which order was which, the Gemara cited to this. When the Gemara went through earlier,
Right.
the Gemara cited to this Mishnah and tried to make sense of it based on the 2 opinions or the 3 opinions I think it was back then.
Right, because I could see
how this interferes with that. That's right.
Why that would be so because of how much weight.
Exactly.
In terms of
That's
how
right.
the Sotah process could stop via
the offering. That's right. If the
the
offering is the last, that's right. If the offering is the last step, and that's the one that validates the whole Sotah, then it would make sense. That's right. So we went through this over there. All the details.
It's kind of complicated.
Yeah. So for now, all we're learning is that these are the 5 cases in which, even if the offering, the fistful was offered in the temple, the proceeding ends, and for the rest of the flour is discarded on the special place where it's burnt. Now, from this, the Gemara gets into broad laws about all meal offerings. Now remember, we're placing meal offerings on this axis, in which ordinarily the meal offering should be eaten partially by the kohen, in this case, sometimes by the owner. But there's an special exception we're going to learn about in the Gemara.
The kohen eat the sotah too.
Say again? Yes, the kohen do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but we're going to learn about in the Gemara that the Torah makes an exception for, where's my Rashi? Yeah. The Torah makes an exception for a kohen. That if a kohen brings a meal offering, the whole thing is burnt. So even though ordinarily on this axis, part of the meal offering is eaten, but if a kohen is the one who's offering a meal offering, completely burnt.
Is that the one?
Meaning it doesn't get, not burnt in the invalidated place, meaning completely burnt in the temple, and on the altar. And that's the offering. It becomes an oila. It becomes a burnt offering. And that's the proceeding, not because of invalidation, because that's the way it's supposed to be done. If an ordinary Jew is bringing a meal offering and partially eaten by the kohen or by the owner, whatever the case is. But if a kohen brings a meal offering, then the entire offering becomes a burnt offering and no invalidation. But this is the way it's supposed to be done, to be completely burnt on the altar. That's the Torah's exception for the kohen.
Isn't that Cohen brings a meal offering when he's newly installed?
So there's the daily one that the kohen gadol brings.
Kohen gadol, and this is completely burned as well?
That's right. As well as if a kohen just decides he wants to thank Hashem and he brings a meal offering, or for whatever reason.
Oh, he can do that?
Yeah, or he's a Nazir and he wants to bring no, not a Nazir. Does Nazir bring a meal offering?
A Nazir.
I don't remember. But if for whatever reason, if whatever part of wherever he's at and he happens to bring a meal offering.
Well, if he's impure, he'll bring one too.
Right. So no matter which meal offering he's bringing, for whatever reason, Torah makes an exception and says this one is completely burnt. Wow. Even if it's on the part of the axis, which ordinarily part of it's eaten by the.
His comrades do not share anything.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay,
so now the question becomes, what happens with a woman who she's not a kohen, but she's married to a kohen, right? Now let's say she's even a sotah, a woman married to a kohen, and she's a sotah, right? Yeah.
So a woman is married to a kohen.
That's right. Let's say she's a sotah. For whatever other reason, she's bringing a meal offering.
Married to a kohen.
Yeah. So she's a regular woman, but she's married to a kohen. So let's see. The kohenim, anyone who's married to a kohen, she's a Jewish woman that's married to a kohen. Because she's now married to a kohen, so she gets the status of kohen, and therefore any meal offering she brings, including whether she happens to be a sotah or for whatever reason she's bringing a meal offering, because she's married to a kohen, that meal offering is burnt just like it is if her husband were to bring it, because her husband's an actual kohen, a born kohen.
It's burnt entirely.
That's right. Yeah.
Entirely on the altar. But she's
a
kohen.
That's right. Now it seems like the next line is doubled. I'm not sure why. I'm trying to look in Rashi. I don't see why the next line is doubled. We just said the same thing. What does it say? How does he explain it here? Let's see what he says. It seems like the next line is repetitive. I'm not sure why. Maybe the Gemara will discuss it. Okay, let's see. Bas Yisrael, the daughter of a Yisrael, of a regular Israelite, not Kohen. She's the daughter of an Israelite. She nisas l'kohen, she married a Kohen. And l'chasa, her meal offering, nisrafa, is burnt as part of the proceedings. It becomes a burnt offering. It seems repeated from the previous statement, which said that all Kohenim are burnt. All women who marry a Kohen, their offerings are burnt. It seems repeated. But maybe the Gemara will discuss it. I haven't learned that far ahead. Yeah, I don't know. The Gemara doesn't. Okay, maybe the Gemara will discuss it. Let's see.
You want to look at this one, Birkin?
I looked at it online. It's the same version.
Oh,
okay. Likewise, now the Kohenes, what about a girl she's a Kohen? Her father's a Kohen. But now, this is the Israel. She's now married to an Israelite. So does she retain the status of her birth family, whose offerings will be burnt because they're Kohenim? Or does she get the status of her husband, which is an Israelite, whose offering will be partially eaten? It says the Gemara, her meal offering is eaten. by the kohen because she's married to a Israelite. As the Gemara is going to explain, the Israelite owns part of his wife's offering, and therefore it's as if by extension it's his offering, and therefore gets the law of a regular Jew who brings a meal offering. And therefore, in conclusion, ma ben kohen l'kohenes, what's the difference between a kohen, a male kohen, and a female kohen? Minchas kohenes, the mincha, the meal offering of a kohenes, of a girl who's born from a kohen family, her father's a kohen. Necheles, the meal offering is eaten. I think this means if she's married. I'm pretty sure we'll have to learn in the Gemara. No, it seems like only she's married, or unless she was divorced from a kohen. Let's say she was married to a kohen, not divorced from a kohen. So now she goes back to her original state of not being kohen, and then she eats, or her meal offering is partially eaten. But minchas kohen, the mincha of a kohen, the mincha of the actual priest, ein necheles, is never eaten; it's always burnt, even if he married to someone he wasn't supposed to, as we're going to learn.
I guess when it said the meal offering of the daughter of a priest, they're referring back to the previous case.
That's right.
Of the woman who's a daughter of a priest but married to an Israelite.
That's right. But even if she's not married anymore, even if she was married, it actually explains if she was.
Oh, I see.
If she was widowed or divorced,
I don't see that.
she goes. That's right. But she actually explains that she goes back to her original state. I mean, when she was married to her husband, her offering was fully burnt.
Her status
But now,
remains the same.
but even after
marriage,
that's right. It reverts back to the way it was before she was married. Meaning, while she's married to the kohen, the meal offering is burnt because she's married to a kohen. Once she's divorced from him, or he's widowed from him, she goes back to original state, and her meal offering is eaten. See what Rashi tells us.
So the original state of what? Her being married to an Israelite? Or
Sorry?
The original state is being married to an Israelite, or
even if she met, yeah, right, okay,
meaning,
both cases. If she was married to, we have to go all directions. Let's start with one case.
Okay.
She's married to she's a kohen, married to an Israelite.
She's married.
At that point, she would be.
They don't eat her offering.
That's right, because she's a family kohen. She marries a Jew, marries an Israelite. Her offering is burnt.
And eaten.
Not eaten because she's married to a kohen. Yes, and eaten because it's brought. And eaten because
her husband has a share.
That's
in her
right.
offering.
Now, Rashi said that even if she's divorced from him, she still retains that status, and her meal offering is eaten.
Means it doesn't go back to the original.
Right, but I think the other way it does. A girl. Oh no, you're right. You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. So an Israelite who marries a kohen. Oh, I think the other way. What if an Israelite marries a kohen? Israelite girl marries a kohen.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
And so while she's married to the kohen, the meal offering is burnt because she's married to a kohen.
Right. Yeah, I can see it.
And then if she's divorced or widowed, I think it reverts back. If I'm not mistaken.
That would make sense.
We'll have to explore more in the Mishnah.
Sorry?
She loses her status as a kohen. That's right. She goes back to the original state and no longer is a kohen. Therefore, her meal offering is partially eaten. If I'm not mistaken. We'll have to see more details when we get to the Gemara's analysis of this. Okay. Hope you got some clarity. Even though there's a lot of details.
Yeah.
God willing, tomorrow we'll continue more laws in this vein. So much fun. I'm joking. God's Torah, and we break our brains to try to understand as best we can. That's how it goes. Okay, wonderful day, Eden.
Thank you.